The moment Catherine broke the script, the entire illusion shattered, and what slipped out wasn't just emotion, it was a truth the palace had been suffocating for months. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. Not here. Not inside a system built on control so tight that even a breath feels scheduled. Catherine had a script in front of her, polished, approved, scrubbed of anything unpredictable. Every word pre-decided. Every pause calculated. That's how this machine works. That's how it has always worked. And yet she looked at it, paused, and then did something that should have been impossible inside those walls. She put it down, face down, like it meant nothing, like it wasn't enough. And then she started speaking in her own words. And that's when everything began to unravel. Because the palace doesn't do unscripted. It doesn't do raw. It definitely doesn't do tears. But Catherine did all three in a single moment, and the timing of it, that's the detail people are still trying to decode. Why then? Why now? What pushed someone that disciplined to step outside a system designed to keep her contained? The answer wasn't in what she said. The answer was in what had been happening before she said it. For months, something felt off. Quietly, subtly, but consistently. Engagements shifting without explanation. Appearances quietly disappearing from schedules. And at the center of it all, a boy who simply wasn't there anymore. Louis, missing from moments he had always been part of. Not once, not twice. Repeatedly, and every time the same response came out of the palace like a rehearsed reflex family privacy. 4 words: polite, empty, suspicious. Because silence like that isn't accidental. It's constructed, built, protected, and William built it. He didn't just support that silence, he enforced it. From the very beginning, he pushed for control, for distance, for boundaries so tight that nothing personal could ever leak out again. And on paper, it worked. For years, a decade actually, a carefully engineered system where George, Charlotte, and Louis existed just enough to be seen but never enough to be known. It looked perfect, but perfection has a cost. And that cost started showing the moment Louis stopped appearing. Because the very thing designed to protect him started isolating him. Quietly, gradually, almost invisibly at first, until the absence became louder than any appearance ever could be. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because the silence didn't just protect it, created questions. The kind nobody inside that building wanted to answer. The kind that grow in the dark. The kind that turn into speculation. And once speculation starts, it doesn't stop. It spreads. Exactly what the system was built to prevent, it triggered. That's the irony, the brutal irony. And it didn't take long for the cracks to widen. Because behind closed doors, something else was happening. Something far more dangerous than headlines or rumors. Something personal. Something that couldn't be controlled with a statement or managed with a press office response. It started at Windsor, not in public, not in front of cameras. A private rehearsal, supposed to be gentle, safe, no pressure, just preparation. A controlled environment where nothing could go wrong. Until it did. Halfway through that rehearsal, Louis stopped. Just stopped. And reached for Catherine's hand. And what he asked next changed everything. He didn't ask if he wanted to go. He didn't ask what he had to do. He asked if he was allowed to be seen. Think about that. Really think about that. An 8-year-old asking permission not to participate, but to exist publicly. That question didn't come out of nowhere. Questions like that don't just appear. They're built piece by piece, silence by silence, absence by absence. Catherine didn't have an answer, not a real one. Because how do you explain something that even the adults around him were struggling to understand? William's reaction was immediate, controlled, protective. He cleared the room, removed everyone, shut it down. Instinct kicking in like it always does: protect first, explain later. But this time, protection wasn't working the way it used to, because what looked like safety from the outside felt like exclusion from the inside. And that's where everything started slipping. William doubled down, pulled Louis from everything, every appearance, every engagement, no discussion, no explanation, just silence, stronger, thicker, heavier than before. And for a moment, it felt right, logical, even necessary. But here's the part nobody saw coming. The silence didn't stay contained. It spread into conversations, into rooms, into the other children. George noticed. Of course he did. 13 is old enough to see patterns, old enough to sense when something isn't being said. He got quieter, more careful, trying to hold everything together without asking too many questions. But Catherine didn't step back. Catherine pushed forward, because what Catherine had seen inside that house was no longer something silence could fix. Catherine said the one thing that shattered the entire argument. Louis had started to believe the silence meant something else. Not protection, not privacy. Shame. An 8-year-old had reached that conclusion alone. No one told Louis that. Louis built it from what wasn't being said. And once that thought exists in a child's mind, it doesn't sit quietly. It grows, it twists, it changes how they see themselves. And Catherine knew that was the real danger, not the press, not the headlines, not the speculation, but what Louis was beginning to believe about Louis. That's the moment everything turned. Because suddenly this wasn't about managing a narrative anymore. It was about undoing something already happening. Catherine pointed to George growing quieter, trying to carry weight that wasn't meant for George. Catherine pointed to Charlotte leaving those quiet little jokes, building small moments of relief without ever being asked. Catherine showed William that the silence wasn't protecting one child anymore, it was shaping all three. And then came the final push, the detail that made it impossible to ignore. Louis didn't just want answers. Louis wanted to speak. Louis wanted people to know Louis hadn't disappeared out of fear. Louis wanted George and Charlotte to know their effort mattered. And most of all, Louis wanted to say thank you. That wasn't strategy. That wasn't PR. That was a child trying to reclaim something that had been slipping away. And for the first time, William stopped fighting it. Because William admitted something that changed everything. This wasn't just about protecting family. This was about fear. William's fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of watching history repeat itself. Fear of the world taking something personal and turning it into spectacle. And once that admission came out, the entire foundation of that silence cracked. The decision moved upward to Charles. And Charles didn't treat it like a communications issue. Charles treated it like something deeper. When Charles reached the line about a child mistaking privacy for shame, Charles stopped. Because Charles understood exactly what that meant. Charles had lived that system. Charles had enforced that system. And Charles had watched what it cost. So Charles made a decision that no advisor would have made. Charles kept Louis in the statement. Louis's voice stayed. The part where Louis thanked people stayed, because removing it would protect the institution but fail the person at the center of it. And then came the condition that changed everything. Louis had to hear it first. Every word. No filtering, no summaries. Louis had to know exactly what the world would hear, and Louis had the power to stop it. An 8-year-old given control over a royal narrative about his own life. That alone tells you how serious this had become. When Catherine read it to Louis, something unexpected happened. Louis didn't reject it. Louis corrected it. One line. Just one. Catherine had written that Louis was doing better. Louis didn't want that. Louis wanted people to know Louis was getting strong again. That difference, small on paper, massive in meaning. One suggests recovery happening to someone, the other shows strength coming from within. And somehow, Louis saw that clearer than an entire communications team. This statement went out. Catherine spoke. Catherine didn't stop when emotion hit. Catherine didn't hide it. And the reaction was immediate. Fast, loud, exactly what William feared. Timelines built. Appearances analyzed. Footage replayed. Every absence suddenly turned into a question. And then it crossed a line. A commentator froze Louis's face on screen and started analyzing it frame by frame, telling the world what Louis might have been feeling in a moment years earlier. That was it. William saw it, stood up, turned the screen off, and said, "The only thing that mattered, my son, is not entertainment." But outside those walls, something else was happening. People weren't just watching. People were responding, leaving messages, blue stars, words written not just for Louis, but for their own children, their own families. The story had moved beyond the palace. It wasn't just about royalty anymore. It was about something universal, how silence affects a child, how fear hides inside protection, how honesty, even when messy, can bring someone back. And days later, in a quiet garden room, the truth came full circle. William sat on the floor with Louis. No titles, no structure, just a father and a son. And when William asked how Louis felt, Louis didn't talk about the statement. Louis talked about something else entirely. Louis said Louis had noticed the silence, the way conversations stopped, the way things disappeared when Louis entered the room. And Louis had made sense of it the only way possible. Louis believed Louis would never be part of those moments again.